The Celtics and Jaylen Brown are currently in talks about a supermax deal, which is believed to be over $304 million, around that range. But they haven't been able to work out a deal right now. I believe Jaylen Brown is going on a trip overseas, and that once he comes back, they'll further negotiate on this deal. From what I've been reading, it's certain things that are holding up the deal, such as incentives. That basically with incentives, it's like, for example, if you make an all NBA first team, then you'll get a certain amount of extra money to kick in there that could equal the $304 million total. So I think the Celtics are trying to add a bunch of incentives. They don't want to give him straight up $304 million, but if he hits certain incentives, it'll kick in to be a total of $304 million. So that's what I believe it is. But with that being said, is Jaylen Brown worth that money? Is he actually worth it? So when I look at Jaylen Brown's numbers the last few years, he's been a pretty efficient player. He's shot 48% 2 years ago from the field. Last season, well, I'm going to say the 2022 season, he shot 47%. And then last year, he shot 49% from the field. His three-point percentage has always been kind of like iffy. It kind of hovers around 35-36% for his career. So it is 36% for his career. So he's like an okay three-point shooter. I think 35 is like average these days. It's considered average for a three-point shooting. So he's basically an average shooter. Not really good, but not terrible, just somewhat decent. But his scoring is his asset. He's averaged around 24 to 26 points per game the last 3 seasons. Last year, he averaged 26.6. And during the playoffs, it's interesting because his scoring tends to go down during the playoffs. It goes down to low 20s. Like, he's averaging 21 to 23 points per game during the playoffs. Last season, for example, his regular season average was 26.6. During the playoffs, he averaged 22.7. But one thing I'll say is that his field goal percentage is still very high during the playoffs. So it shows he's still pretty efficient. I guess he's getting less shot attempts for some reason. Maybe Tatum is taking more attempts. But he's been very efficient. He's been a great number 2 guy. I think the question you had to ask yourself is it worth it to give your number 2 guy a supermax deal? So from what I'm reading, the Celtics, when it comes to just offering him a regular max, I think it would be $295 million, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he's eligible for a $295 million if he wants to go for a regular max. Now, if he wants to go for a super max, it goes above the $300 million mark. I've heard 304 is possibly the super max, or it's the number the Celtics are trying to get according to Woj. So that's a lot of money, only if you keep in mind that Nikola Jokic currently has the highest contract in the league at $276 million over 5 years. Obviously, definitely worth it because Jokic is the best player in the league, so he deserves all that money. There's no doubt about it. He's worthy of that supermax deal the Nuggets gave him. But also keep in mind that Jokic's supermax deal takes up like 35% of Denver's cap. And then you factor in Murray, who's probably will get a max deal very soon if he hasn't. So it's kind of like you have to be judicious with your cap space. And I think that's really the issue with the Celtics, because if you give Jaylen Brown a supermax deal, then you're going to have to give Tatum the supermax deal, since Tatum is the best player on the Celtics. That deal I've read that Tatum's eligible for is a 5-year, $318 million extension. So let's say that you hypothetically give Jaylen Brown the supermax deal. Then you're going to give Tatum a supermax deal next year when he's eligible for it. So basically, with those 2 guys, they're going to take up probably something like 70% or 80% of your cap. I'm just estimating that in my mind based on the Jokic figure of taking up 35% of the Denver cap. So if you have 2 guys take up so much of your cap, how are you going to be able to afford the rest of the players around them? Like, I guess maybe they could pay the luxury tax, but I guess if it goes to the second apron, you got to be concerned, obviously. So I think that's going to be the tough thing the Celtics have to deal with going forward. Now, the question I would wonder is how much money could they save if they offered him the max of $295 million instead of the super max? Would it be good enough to avoid some luxury tax penalties? Or do you risk offended Jaylen Brown by not giving him the super max? Granted, I think $295 is still a lot of money. He would still be the highest paid player in the league with a $295 million deal. So just when you look at just the landscape currently right now, is Jaylen Brown really worth that money? He's really good, but to be paid the highest contract in the league good, I don't think so. I think the Celtics are really in a hard spot right now in the sense that if they let him walk, then they definitely take several steps back with just having Tatum and a bunch of role players. So it's kind of like a tough position. It's like being caught between a rock and a hard place. Just it's difficult. I don't really think there's an easy move. I guess they could sling it and just try to bring him back and just hope they go for it all next season and it works out. But if it doesn't, then over the next few years, I think it'll have high repercussions for them when it comes to building a winning team. Because if you could just only surround Tatum and Brown with just solid role players, do them taking up most of the cap space or even below average role players, then they're not going to win a championship. So that's a really tough spot. I don't think he's worth that money. I don't. I think he's a really good second option, but he's demanding like superstar money. Just like to demand the highest contract in the league when you're not even close to being a top 5 player and not even a top 10 player. I would say right now, I would say probably somewhere between 11 through 20. You could put him in that range, but I just can't see how you justify that. Just it's a really hard decision for the Celtics going forward. And granted, I do think with this new deal that in a few years, Jaylen Brown's deal will look small compared to these other superstars getting even deals bigger than his. But right now, you scratch your head about it. But that's all I have to say about it.